My name's Clara, and if you ever thought being the good daughter guaranteed love, think again. I watched my parents' store nearly burn to the ground while the real culprit, my sister Lena, stood crying in the street. They didn't blame her. They blamed me. And that was the first time I learned that loyalty meant nothing if you were born into the role of scapegoat. Where are you watching this from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'd love to see how far this story reaches. The flames licked the roof of the supply shed like hungry tongues, orange and frantic against the night sky. I remember the taste of metal on my tongue. Panic always did that to me, and the sting of smoke in my eyes as I sprinted toward the building with nothing but a soaked rag over my face. I wasn't supposed to be here. I was supposed to be at a study group, but Lena had begged me to cover her shift at the store, promising she'd be quick, that she just needed some air. Turns out, her air break included a secret cigarette behind the propane tanks. It took all of 10 minutes for her bad habit to bloom into a full-blown emergency. "Clara! Clara, help!" she screamed from the alley as the fire rose behind her. Her mascara ran like ink down her face, her hands shaking like wet leaves. I didn't hesitate. I ran past her and into the store. Inside, smoke curled along the ceiling, clawing downward. I grabbed the fire extinguisher, yanked open the back door, and started spraying where the flames first broke. Boxes of canned goods popped loudly like small explosions. Somewhere in the chaos, I could hear Lena sobbing outside, but I didn't have time for that. The firefighters arrived in a glorious symphony of sirens and steam. By the time they hosed down the last stubborn flare, the shed was half charred, but the main store had been spared. Barely. I should have been a hero. I should have at least earned a thank you. Instead, the second my parents pulled into the parking lot, my mother rushed to Lena's side, checking her over like she just survived a plane crash. My father turned to me with that familiar, disappointed squint in his eyes. "Where were you when this started, Clara?" he asked, voice flat. I blinked. "She lit the cigarette, Dad. She told me she was. You knew she sneaks around. It was your shift. You're supposed to be responsible." That word, responsible, it was their favorite leash. So while Lena got to cry into my mother's coat, I was handed a mop and told to clean up the mess you didn't stop. That night, while the store still smelled like charcoal and chemical foam, my parents sat me down in the scorched break room. "You'll work weekends," my father said, "until we can pay back what the insurance won't cover." "But I didn't," I tried. "Do you want this family to go under because of one mistake?" My mother snapped. One mistake. And apparently it was mine. I didn't cry. Not until later when I was alone, crouched between warped shelves and half-melted price tags. My hands were still red from scrubbing soot, and I kept hearing the crackle of the fire in my ears like phantom echoes. That night didn't just scar the store. It marked me. From then on, I wasn't Clara the daughter. I was Clara the unpaid laborer. Clara the mistake catcher. Clara who should have known better. And Lena. She got grounded for a week and a new phone after losing hers in the chaos. Fair? No, but if I'd learned anything that night, it was this. In my family, justice burned faster than wood. Years passed, but the smoke from that night never fully left me. It stayed in my clothes longer than it should have. Clung to my hair during freshman year of high school like some invisible shame I couldn't rinse out. It even seeped into my notebooks. The margins filled with neat little equations and vocabulary lists beside tiny, angry doodles of flames. While Lena drifted from one phase to the next, pink hair, a pierced eyebrow, then a boyfriend with a motorcycle who made my dad growl under his breath, I stayed late at school. Always. The library became my second home, and textbooks turned into anchors I could control. I couldn't fix my family, but I could conquer calculus. I chased every scholarship like my future depended on it, because it did. And somehow, through a blur of late-night coffee, part-time tutoring jobs, and years of pretending I didn't notice the eye rolls when I mentioned school, I made it. Top of my class. A full ride to the University of Chicago. I remember the exact moment the envelope came. I opened it alone in my bedroom, where Lena had scrawled Nerd HQ on the door in lipstick. My hands shook as I read the first line. "We are pleased to inform you," I cried, just a little. Then I ran downstairs with the letter clutched to my chest, expecting maybe, just maybe, a real celebration. My mom's reaction, she looked over the paper like it was a parking ticket. "That's in the city, right? You're not moving into one of those apartments, are you?" My dad squinted at the scholarship amount. "This much money for English classes, you better take something useful." Lena didn't even glance up from her phone, but I went anyway. I packed my things, hugged them goodbye with a hollow smile, and walked straight into a life that, for the first time, felt like it could belong to me. College was like a warm, slow exhale after years of holding my breath. I found professors who asked what I thought, not just what I knew. Friends who didn't flinch when I mentioned long nights at the store. I even joined the debate team, me, the girl who once trembled just asking for ketchup at a diner. By senior year, I was set to graduate with honors. My GPA was flawless. My thesis was nominated for departmental distinction, and I'd been chosen as valedictorian. Me, Clara, the girl who used to study flashcards next to mop buckets. The ceremony was held in the grand auditorium with domed ceilings and polished wood floors that smelled like lemon oil and ambition. I'd written and rewritten my speech 10 times, trying to make it perfect. Not poetic, just honest. And they came, my parents. They sat stiffly in the back row, Lena chewing gum next to them like she was bored out of her mind. I spotted them halfway through my speech, right when I thanked those who believed in me, even when I was the only one who did. Afterward, I walked over to them with my diploma in hand, my smile wide and trembling. "You made it," I said softly. My mother offered a thin smile. "We didn't want you to say later we never show up." Then my dad, clapping me once on the back too hard, too final, said, "Lena never got chances like you. We just want you to remember that." And just like that, the moment deflated. No, we're proud of you. No hugs, no photo. Just a reminder that my success was somehow a theft from my sister. I watched them leave before I did, their car pulling away with Lena's music blaring through cracked windows. I stood alone in my graduation robe, my honors sash fluttering in the wind like something left behind. There was a small party later, thrown by my friends. Balloons, cake, laughter. Someone toasted to the smartest woman in the room, and everyone cheered. But inside, I felt like an empty envelope. Achievements, it seemed, meant nothing when no one you loved wanted to open them. So I made a promise to myself that night. If my family only saw me as a supporting act to Lena's chaos, then I'd stop waiting for applause from that crowd. I would build something better. Not just a career, a life. One where respect wasn't rationed. One where I didn't have to earn love like a paycheck. And I had no idea how close I already was to making that happen. There's a strange kind of silence that follows graduation. It's not the absence of sound, really. It's the absence of direction. You spend 4 years sprinting toward a finish line, only to cross it and find more track. Just longer and with fewer water stations. But I was lucky. Sort of. While most of my classmates juggled unpaid internships and 3 roommates in shoebox apartments, I landed a job straight out of school. A manager position at one of Chicago's top grocery chains. Competitive salary, benefits, and best of all, a team that actually listened when I spoke. The irony didn't escape me. All those nights working unpaid shifts in the back of my parents' store, learning inventory tricks and supplier psychology by watching my dad haggle over oranges, it actually paid off. The thing they exploited had quietly turned into my edge. My first paycheck felt like a small miracle. I remember holding it like it might dissolve if I blinked too hard. I didn't go crazy. I didn't need designer bags or gold-plated anything. I bought a modest studio apartment with a slanted ceiling and creaky hardwood floors. The windows were drafty, but the view, pure freedom. I hung a corkboard over my desk, filled it with post-it notes, goals, quotes, reminders. The biggest one in the center read, "This is your space. No one gets to dim your light here." I meant it. At least until the calls started coming in again. First, it was my mom. "Your cousin needs help paying for her books. She's studying nursing, just like you wanted to do once, remember?" Then Lena. "I've been thinking about opening a pop-up boutique. You know, clothes, crystals, a vibe. Can I borrow your card for a few days?" Even my dad got in on it. "The store's freezer needs replacing. Business has been tight. You know we'd help you if you needed it." I said yes at first. Of course I did. Some habits don't vanish with a diploma. I told myself I was just helping. But deep down, I could feel that old burn familiar as ash. I was still playing the same role, just with a new costume and a better paycheck. Every month, like clockwork, I'd wire money back home. And every time there'd be no thank you, just another request. They didn't ask how work was going. They didn't visit the new apartment. Lena once texted me a selfie from a spa with the caption, "Self-care day, thanks girl." And it hit me, they didn't see me. They saw a debit card that answered calls, a wallet with a pulse. It wasn't just frustrating, it was heartbreaking. Because at work, I was someone. I ran weekly meetings. I signed off on training protocols. My staff respected me. Sometimes they even asked for advice about careers, about their relationships. I kept a candy jar on my desk just to make people smile. But at home, I was still the cleanup crew for everyone else's mess. That duality started to tear at me. One afternoon, after reviewing a quarterly report, my regional director patted my shoulder and said, "Clara, you're the glue in this store. Have you ever thought about proposing streamlining models for the whole district?" I smiled politely, but the thought stuck with me. Streamlining. I couldn't stop thinking about it. About how my family's store still used handwritten logs and cash registers from the 90s. How orders were still called in manually. How Lena once sold a week's worth of candy stock at cost because she forgot how margins work. So I drafted a proposal. Not for my company, but for them. It was clean, thorough, and considerate. I even adjusted the tone to be as unthreatening as possible. Just some humble suggestions from the responsible daughter. When I presented it over dinner one weekend, I was nervous. My fingers trembled around my glass of water. "I thought we could modernize a little," I said. "Just to make life easier. Digital inventory, a better point-of-sale system, low-cost stuff with high ROI. There was a pause. Then my mother leaned back and said, "You want to change everything." My dad scoffed. "Or maybe you just want us to feel stupid." And then came the gut punch. "We're putting Lena in charge of implementation," he said, like it was already decided. "But we'll use your money. That's generous of you." I sat there, mouth slightly open, my heart thudding against my ribs like it wanted out. They didn't hear a word of my plan. They never wanted my brain, just my bank account. I nodded slowly, stood up from the table, and excused myself. As I walked out of that house, the spring wind sharp against my cheeks, I realized something. They had burned me once. But this time, I smelled the smoke early. The office smelled like paper and old coffee. You know, the kind burnt bitter, like something that used to be alive. I stood there, back pressed against the cold filing cabinet, watching Lena spin around in the chair I used to organize stock from. She was glowing. "They gave me full access," she said, holding up a login screen like it was some prize she'd earned. "Even the supplier portal. You should see how much candy we overorder. It's wild." That was my system. The one I built in a weekend after fixing their crumbling spreadsheets and their trust-your-gut pricing method. I hadn't even finished installing the new barcode scanners. But they'd already handed it to her, because she was family, because they trusted her. "Just let me know if you need help setting anything up," I offered gently, swallowing the rising heat in my throat. She glanced at me with a smirk. "I mean, I'll figure it out. Can't be that hard, right?" I nodded. What else was there to do? I'd spent weeks designing a proposal that could save their business, and they'd used it as a springboard to promote the one person least equipped to handle it. Lena couldn't balance a checkbook. She still called credit scores vibes. But they gave her the keys. And me? They gave me the bill. As I walked out of the store that day, the parking lot sun glinting off windshields, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't rage exactly. It was colder, sharper. It was clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a choice, a calculated decision. They didn't value me for what I built. They valued me for what I could fund. I sat in my car for a while, hands on the steering wheel, watching Lena through the window as she paraded around the store like it was her kingdom. Our parents followed behind, smiling proudly, like she'd finally stepped up. But they didn't see the unsent emails in my drafts, the late nights I spent tweaking cost models, the research, the consultations I arranged with a friend from business school. They saw me as the budget department. I thought about all the times I had quietly saved them, paid off late fees without a word, smoothed over vendor relationships, restocked when shipments were missed. None of it had ever earned me a seat at the table. And this time I didn't cry. That was new. Instead, I drove back to the city with the windows down, letting the wind carry away the last of my illusions. I pulled into my building, greeted the security guard by name, and took the elevator up to my little studio. When I closed the door behind me, the silence was warm, not lonely. I kicked off my shoes, walked straight to the kitchen, and pulled a post-it from my corkboard, the one that said, "This is your space. No one gets to dim your light here." I stared at it for a long moment. Then I added a new one just below it. "They don't want you to shine. They want to use your light to keep their own shadows hidden." From that day on, I started documenting everything. Every text asking for more money, every missed invoice under Lena's leadership, every call that sounded suspiciously like a guilt trap dressed in concern, because something in me had cracked, and not in a way that would heal the same. No, this time I wasn't just going to swallow the injustice. I was going to name it. And soon I'd be forced to choose between keeping the peace and keeping my soul. I stopped visiting the store after that, not out of spite, not even because I was angry. I stopped going because I couldn't bear to watch it happen. At first, it was little things, customer reviews dropping, shelves that weren't restocked. Then vendors started calling me, not Lena, because she kept missing appointments and mixing up orders. I'd listen to the voicemails at night while stirring pasta, every word tightening the knot in my chest. "This is Mike from County Produce. We didn't get a reorder and no one's answering. Just a heads up, your inventory shows negative units again. Look, I'm trying not to pull the contract, but this is the third week." The worst part, I still tried to help. Quietly, discreetly, like some invisible shadow behind Lena's clueless throne. I sent her gentle reminders, offered to walk her through reorders. I even forwarded a training module I used at work, explaining inventory hygiene in 3 simple steps. Her response, "You think you know everything just because you went to college." It was the same old tune, just a different verse. And yet, I still worried. About the staff, about the customers who depended on that store for groceries in a neighborhood full of overpriced convenience marts. About what would happen when the money ran dry. Because eventually it always does. The texts from my parents started shifting in tone. At first it was subtle. "Business is a little tight, mind spotting us for a shipment." Then it was more pointed. "Clara, you know this is your family's store too." And finally, desperate, "If you don't help, we could lose everything your grandfather built." That one got to me, not because of guilt, but because of how effortlessly they used his name as leverage. My grandfather was the only person who ever said he was proud of me. I still remember him tucking a $5 bill into my backpack after I passed my driving test and whispering, "You're going to run circles around all of us one day." He died before I graduated high school, but I wonder what he would have thought, watching his daughter and son-in-law bulldoze the place he'd built out of pride, not pity. I finally agreed to come by one morning before opening hours, just to consult, I said. The store was dim when I arrived. Half the lights were off and the air smelled like stale crackers and freezer burn. Lena was counting money at the register, chewing gum like she was bored of her own incompetence. "I didn't think you'd show," she said flatly. "I wanted to see it for myself," I replied, walking down the cereal aisle. Empty shelves, dust where bread should have been. A broken freezer door propped open with a broom handle. I turned back toward her. "This is worse than I thought." She shrugged. "It's been a slow couple of months. You wouldn't understand. Corporate jobs are all security and no risk." I almost laughed. No risk. I'd spent my entire adult life trying to prove myself to people who wanted my money, not my mind. That was risk. That was heartbreak. "You need help, Lena." "No," she said, her gum popping like a period. "We need money, that's different." I left without another word. I didn't slam the door. I didn't make a scene. I just walked out, hands shaking in my coat pockets. That night in the kitchen of my apartment, I stood with my forehead pressed to the cabinet, trying not to cry. I told myself for years that if I just worked hard enough, if I just gave enough, they'd see me. But maybe they didn't want to. Maybe it was easier for them if I stayed useful but invisible. The next morning, I got the call. Dad, voice rough with anger. No greeting. "We're going to lose the store unless you co-sign a loan." I blinked at the sunlight streaking across my floor. "What kind of loan?" "Just a small business one, government-backed, but your credit's better." Of course it was. "I'm not signing anything." Silence. Then a low growl, "Don't be selfish, after all we've done for you." I laughed then, soft, hollow. "You mean after everything I've done for you?" Click. The line went dead. That evening, I showed up at their house to talk face to face, hoping, maybe foolishly, that clarity could be found in eye contact. But my father didn't want clarity. He wanted compliance. When I offered alternative ways to restructure, to liquidate and start fresh, anything other than risking my credit, he exploded. "You ungrateful brat," he shouted, slamming his fist on the kitchen table. "We put food in your mouth and now you turn your back on us." My mother sat stone still beside him, not one word in my defense. And me, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just picked up my bag, walked to the door, and said quietly, "If food came with a price tag this steep, Maybe I should have gone hungry. That night, I ended up on a park bench near the lake. Just me, a duffel bag, and the cold Chicago wind. No keys to my childhood home. No safety net. But for the first time, I also had no more illusions. It took 3 full days before I could say my own name out loud without choking on it. 3 nights of waking up every hour, wondering if I'd made it all up, if I had dreamed the kitchen table, the shouting, the way the front door closed behind me like the end of a trial. But I hadn't. The bruise on my shoulder from carrying that duffel bag confirmed it. So did the silence from my phone. No missed calls, no apologies, just stillness. I slept the first night on that park bench beneath a rustling canopy of early summer leaves. Chicago air is never truly quiet, but that night it felt like the city was holding its breath with me. I had nowhere to go, not because I lacked options, but because I'd never had to think about what I needed first. I ended up calling Jasmine the next morning, voice barely above a whisper. She didn't ask questions, just told me to get in a cab, come to her place, and use the door code she'd texted. No lectures. No what happened. Just a soft, "I've got you." Jasmine had been my friend since sophomore year of college, when we'd bonded over broken printers and too much caffeine. She was the kind of person who kept fuzzy socks for guests and used candles that smelled like libraries. Her apartment smelled like lavender and cinnamon when I stepped inside. "I'll take the couch," she said before I could argue. "You need real sleep, and a real door that locks." I cried in the shower that night, not because I was sad, but because the water was warm and the towel was clean and no one expected anything from me. I moved in for the time being, just until I could figure out a plan. That plan changed when Dylan came into the picture. He wasn't new. He worked in produce at my store, a quiet guy with steady hands who always smelled like fresh basil. We'd shared small talk for months, but nothing serious. Until Jasmine invited him over for dinner one night, and I looked across the table and saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in a long time. Safe curiosity. Not pity. Not admiration wrapped in expectation. Just someone who noticed I liked my soup extra hot and that I always checked expiration dates twice. We started going on walks, talking about nothing, books, music, the weird sounds old buildings make when they settle. He never pressed. Never tried to fix anything. He just stayed. And slowly, the tight ball of panic in my chest began to loosen. Jasmine painted the wall behind the couch a bright ochre and called it Clara's Corner. Dylan brought over a lemon tree in a pot and named it Hope. I started cooking again, real meals. Not frozen dinners eaten standing up, but pasta tossed with garlic and tomatoes, bread warmed in the oven, tea steeped just right. We'd sit at the table together, laughing about whose day had been weirder, and I'd feel this warmth bloom in my ribcage that scared me at first, because it meant I was healing. Even as my phone remained silent, no one from my family reached out, not a single text from Lena. No, we miss you, no, come home. And yet, for once, that silence didn't ache, it clarified, because in its place were the voices of people who chose me. Jasmine, banging pots around to make me laugh. Dylan tapping on the glass to show me a raccoon stealing our trash. The barista downstairs who started remembering my name. The neighbor who waved every morning. I began to see what family could mean. Not obligation. Not emotional blackmail, just presence. So I added a new note to my corkboard, this one hand-lettered in marker. Chosen love is still real love. Some days I still reached for my phone out of habit. Some nights I still dreamed of their kitchen, of sitting down and being heard just once. But more often, I dreamed of Sunday dinners with candles and laughter, of sunlight through Jasmine's window, of Dylan's hand gently reaching for mine under the table. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to earn my place in the room. I just was. And that, more than anything, was the beginning of freedom. It started with a vibration, just one, but it echoed louder than any argument I'd ever had in that house. I was slicing vegetables in the kitchen, humming along to Jasmine's old vinyls when my phone rattled across the counter. Then it buzzed again, and again. By the time I picked it up, the screen was lit up like a fireworks show, 30 missed calls, 10 from my mother, 8 from Lena. The rest, unknown numbers that still felt painfully familiar. I stared at it. Jasmine noticed the change in my face from across the room. "You okay?" I didn't answer. I just pressed my lips into a tight line and set the phone down. Another buzz, voicemail. I tapped play. "Clara," my mom's voice rasped, frantic and wet with tears. "Call us, it's urgent, please." My stomach twisted. I deleted it, then the next. Clara, we don't know what to do. Lena's in the hospital. Call me. My fingers hovered over the delete button, but I didn't press it. I tapped on the final message, Lena's number. I almost didn't recognize her voice when it came through. It wasn't snarky, or smug, or coated in that varnish of eye-rolling indifference. She sounded small. Clara, it's me. I didn't know who else to call. They think it's serious. My lungs, something's wrong. I can't. A sob broke the sentence. I was wrong about everything. You were right. Then silence. Not the kind that lingers, the kind that thuds. I sat down on the floor, the knife still on the counter, the carrots half sliced. Jasmine crouched beside me, one hand on my shoulder, saying nothing. Because what was there to say? How do you make sense of someone who broke you reaching back with trembling fingers? I didn't answer any of the calls, not that day. Instead, I sat on my balcony with Dylan later that night, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea that had long gone cold. They only want you when they're scared, I said quietly, watching the glow of windows across the street. It's like I only exist for them when there's something to fix. Dylan didn't argue. He didn't jump to defend them. He just nodded and said, "So what do you need right now?" And that stopped me, because no one had ever asked me that. I didn't know how to answer. Not yet. That night, sleep was restless. My dreams were a mosaic of hospital corridors and half-heard apologies. I woke up gasping, the sheets tangled around my legs like restraints. In the morning, I made coffee and opened my laptop like it was any other Tuesday, but my fingers didn't type. They hovered over the keyboard, unsure if work emails could really matter when your sister might be dying. But then again, would I be here if the roles were reversed? If I were the one in the hospital, would Lena come? Would my parents? Or would they say, well, Clara always was the strong one? The thought stung more than I expected, so I picked up my phone, not to call, not yet, but to text, just one sentence. We'll talk, but on my terms. And I hit send. My chest didn't unclench immediately, but it shifted, like the moment before rain finally breaks through the clouds. Jasmine looked over her coffee mug and raised an eyebrow. You good? I gave the smallest nod. I think I'm starting to be. Because this time I wasn't running back into the fire. I wasn't handing over my voice or my heart like some family heirloom to be mishandled again. This time, I would walk in with boundaries sharp as glass and a spine forged from every scar they gave me. And maybe, just maybe, Lena's voice on that voicemail was the first real crack in the wall they'd all helped build. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and old air, that unmistakable blend of too much bleach and not enough comfort. I stood in front of the entrance for 10 whole minutes before going in. My hands were cold, my breath shallow, like my body didn't quite agree with the decision my mind had made. But I had texted. I had said we'd talk. And part of me, I'm not sure which, needed to see her face, not for her, for me. The receptionist gave me a visitor's badge with a sympathetic smile. Room 418B, I rode the elevator in silence, counting the floors like steps back into the past. When I reached the hallway, my feet slowed. A nurse brushed past me carrying a chart. Somewhere nearby, a machine beeped steadily. I stopped outside her door, deep breath, then another, and then I pushed it open. Lena looked smaller than I remembered. Not just physically, though her frame was shrunken under the blankets, her skin pale and waxy, but smaller in spirit. Her eyes were puffy, her hair tied back sloppily, and there were wires everywhere. Oxygen tubes, monitors, IV lines. She turned her head slowly, and when she saw me, she didn't smile. She cried. "I didn't think you'd come," she whispered. I stayed by the door, arms folded across my chest, grounding myself. "You said we'd talk," I replied. She nodded and tried to sit up, but winced. "They said it's serious, my lungs, some kind of autoimmune thing. I didn't listen when the symptoms started. Kept saying it was just allergies." I didn't say anything, just waited. Her fingers gripped the edge of the sheet. "I messed everything up." That part I agreed with. "I treated you like a safety net," she continued, her voice shaking. "Not a person, I used you, we all did." That one landed harder than I expected. She took a rattling breath. "You were always the strong one. I thought maybe you didn't need anything." "That's because no one ever asked if I did," I said softly. Silence stretched between us, heavy as concrete. "I'm sorry," Lena whispered, and this time her voice cracked in a way I'd never heard before. "Not just for the fire, or the money, or the stupid systems I couldn't even run. I'm sorry I didn't see you. I didn't want to, because then I'd have to see myself too." I walked slowly to the chair beside the bed and sat down. For the first time in forever, we were just two sisters. No audience, no family roles to perform. just two tired women with matching brown eyes and a decade's worth of damage between them. I'm not here to fix anything, I said. I'm not here to sign papers or save the business. Lena nodded. I know. If you need help, real help, I'll offer support, but it'll be on paper, legal, boundaries in writing. Again, she nodded. And I'm not moving back, ever. That one made her cry harder, but she didn't argue. I wouldn't ask you to, she said. Honestly, you shouldn't. There it was. The truth we'd danced around for years finally spoken aloud. We shouldn't have been under the same roof. Not when one of us was taught to apologize and the other taught to expect it. The nurse peeked in, took Lena's vitals, and left. We sat in silence after that, watching the sky change colors through the tiny window. I still remember that night in the attic, Lena said quietly. I blinked. What night? When we were kids, you were crying because Mom yelled at you for reading instead of helping with dinner. I sat next to you and made up that stupid story about a planet where daughters ran kingdoms. A laugh slipped out, unsteady, but real. Planet Claritron, I said, smiling faintly. You said they wore tiaras made of books. I never forgot that, she whispered. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I didn't feel like I was talking to the person who betrayed me. I was talking to the girl who once braided my hair and stuck glow in the dark stars on my ceiling. We weren't healed. Not yet. But we weren't breaking anymore either. I didn't tell Jasmine everything right away. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I needed time to process what had just happened in that hospital room. It's strange how someone can break your heart 100 different ways and still make a small piece of you ache for them when they're hurting. But I also knew something now that I hadn't fully accepted before. Forgiveness and permission are not the same thing. So I did what I do best. I made a plan. 3 days after visiting Lena, I drafted an agreement. A formal financial document, one with clauses, caps, repayment schedules, everything you'd find in a real partnership. It wasn't cold. It was clear, fair, firm, because if they wanted my help, they'd get it, but not on the old terms. No more blurred lines, no more guilt-tripped generosity. I sent the document to my parents' email with a short note. If this is what you want, let's make it official. Otherwise, I wish you well. And I meant it. For the first time, I could walk away clean if they didn't respond. I'd made peace with it. But they did respond. Not with hostility, not with resistance. They signed it, every page. And when I walked into that lawyer's office to review the final copy, I found my father already there, sitting stiffly in the corner, hands folded like he was holding something fragile. Clara, he said, not looking up, this doesn't feel natural. It's not meant to, I said calmly. It's meant to be functional. He nodded, slow, heavy. Your mother cried when she saw the signature line. I didn't flinch. So did I when the documents were filed. I stood up to leave. Wait, he said. I paused at the door. You turned out stronger than I ever imagined, he murmured. Maybe too strong for us. I let the words hang in the air. Then I left. I visited Lena again a week later. She was awake, alert, and bored, which for Lena meant she was truly healing. They won't let me eat cheese fries, she grumbled as I walked in. Apparently, salt is my mortal enemy now. I brought her grapes and a crossword book. She lit up. I talked to the lawyer, she said, popping a grape in her mouth. I read the contract. And it's fair, brutally fair, like you. I raised an eyebrow. That's supposed to be a compliment, she smiled. From me, yeah, gold star level. We didn't talk about the store, not much anyway. I knew she'd be stepping back once she was out. I knew Mom had already reached out to one of the vendors I recommended. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd finally become the thing they refused to call me, the authority, not because I fought for power, but because I stopped begging for respect. And that changed everything. At home, Dylan wrapped his arms around me one night while we watched TV and whispered, "You look lighter." Like I lost a grudge. Like you finally remembered you were never the problem. And maybe I had. For years, I'd thought that if I just loved them hard enough, they'd love me back the right way. That if I gave more, they'd see my worth. But worth isn't something you barter for. It's something you decide. So I made my own definition. I was the daughter who saved their business on paper, the sister who showed up on her terms, and the woman who rebuilt her life, not in rebellion, but in rebirth. The hospital cafeteria was almost empty when I arrived. The kind of emptiness that feels intentional, like the universe had cleared out space for something important. The hum of vending machines, the distant clang of trays, and one slow ticking clock on the far wall set the stage for what I knew would be a final performance of sorts. I spotted my parents at a corner table, sitting with rigid posture, paper cups of coffee between them. My mother stared into hers like it held answers. My father's eyes met mine the second I walked in. They stood up, unsure if they should hug me. They didn't. I sat down across from them and pulled a copy of the signed agreement from my bag. "We're not here to rehash," I said before they could speak. "You asked for help, I gave it. Legally, that's the extent of our current relationship." They both nodded, slowly, hesitantly. "I just want to understand," my mom said, "how it got to this point." I stared at her for a moment. The woman who once handed me a mop instead of a birthday card, who used to remind me that Lena was more sensitive, so I had to be the bigger one. "You raised me to believe that love had to be earned," I said calmly. "And when I earned everything, grades, awards, jobs, you told me it still wasn't enough." "That's not fair," she whispered. "No," I agreed. "It's not." My father leaned forward. "We made mistakes. We trusted Lena because she needed it more." I shook my head. "No, you trusted Lena because it was easier to rescue her than to respect me." They didn't argue, not this time. "Lena's recovering," my mom offered. "She's different now." "I know," I said. "I saw it in her eyes." I paused, then added, "But I also saw it in yours. You're not ready to change, you're just ready to survive." They exchanged a glance, and for a second I could almost see the cracks, the fear, the guilt, the stubbornness clinging to tradition like a life raft. I slid the final document across the table. "This adds a clause," I said. "Any future financial support, if there is any, must come with written acknowledgement of its purpose and timeline. No verbal requests, no emergencies without paperwork." My dad looked at the paper, then at me. "You don't trust us," he said. I met his eyes. "I don't need to." He signed, so did my mother. I gathered the papers, stood up, and nodded once. Then I left. Outside, the wind picked up, sharp and cool against my face. I pulled my coat tighter and walked without a clear destination. Just movement, just space. Every step felt lighter, like I was finally shedding the last layer of invisible expectation draped across my shoulders since I was 12. When I got home, Jasmine had already lit candles. Dylan was stirring something fragrant on the stove, his idea of a welcome back ritual. "Did it go how you expected?" he asked. "No," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "It went better." He raised an eyebrow. "I didn't need anything from them," I explained. "That's what made it easier." 2 weeks later, Lena came home from the hospital. She sent me a photo of her standing at the store's front counter, wearing a mask and holding a clipboard. "Just checking inventory like the nerd you taught me to be," her text read. I smiled. She was trying. And sometimes that's all we get to ask for. We met up for tea one afternoon. No drama, no speeches. Just two sisters reconnecting over chamomile and cautious honesty. "I might not ever be the sibling you needed," Lena said, staring into her mug. "But I'm trying to be someone you're not ashamed to call your sister." "I never needed perfect," I said. "I just needed real." And for the first time in years, we found a middle ground, not made of obligation, but of effort. The apartment was different now. My name was on the lease. My plants were thriving. My corkboard had new notes. "You don't owe anyone the version of yourself they prefer." And below it, "You are not the family you came from. You are the love you choose to give." It was a warm Sunday in late September when we had the dinner. The first one in years where I didn't show up out of obligation or expectation, but because I chose to. Jasmine helped me pick out the wine. Dylan offered to drive. Lena insisted on hosting it at the new apartment she was sharing with a friend, just a few blocks from the family store. The store, now finally stable again, had Lena working a modest register schedule while a third-party manager, someone I recommended, handled operations. My parents no longer hovered over the aisles like watchmen. They'd stepped back, not out of grace, but fatigue. But even that was a start. That night, as I walked into Lena's apartment, I felt calm. There were strings of warm lights hanging above the patio. A simple table set with mismatched chairs. A roast in the oven. Someone had lit a candle that smelled like honey and cedar. It didn't look like a picture-perfect family reunion. It looked like growth, the kind that's slow, uneven, but unmistakably alive. Lena greeted me at the door with a quiet smile. "I made that salad you always liked," she said, like it was a peace offering in edible form. "Thanks," I said, stepping inside. My parents were already seated, less rigid than usual, though still wary around the edges. They stood when I entered, and my mom actually opened her arms in a tentative hug. It wasn't warm, but it wasn't cold either. Progress. Everyone waited for me to sit before beginning the meal. And it wasn't until halfway through the dinner as we passed dishes and exchanged easy conversation that I realized something. They had left the head of the table open. I sat there without thinking, just following the flow of movement, and no one said a word. No one protested. No one made a joke about me taking over everything. It was subtle, but unmistakable. They were letting me lead, not because I demanded it, but because I had finally stopped asking. We talked about everything that night, books, work, even Lena's recovery schedule. But we never once mentioned the contracts, the fights, the years of imbalance. And that silence, it wasn't avoidance, it was respect. After dinner, Lena and I cleared the dishes while Dylan made coffee and my parents quietly browsed her bookshelf. "Remember when Mom made us hand wash every dish, even during finals week?" Lena asked, elbow deep in suds. I smirked. "I remember you disappearing halfway through and me finishing them alone." She winced. "Yeah, that sounds right." We stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of forks clinking and water running filling the air. "Thank you," she said suddenly. I looked over. "For what?" "For not cutting me off, even when I gave you every reason to." I shook my head. "You gave me one good reason to try again, and that's all I needed." She nodded. "Still, you saved more than the store." I didn't answer, just reached for a towel and dried the last plate. Later that evening, Dylan and I walked home under the quiet weight of city lights. The sidewalks were scattered with early autumn leaves. My hand found his, easy and unhurried. "You were different tonight," he said. "How so?" "Peaceful. Powerful, like you weren't carrying everyone anymore." I smiled. "That's because I'm not." We stopped at a corner, waiting for the light to change. "I used to think being strong meant absorbing it all," I said. "Holding everything together so no one else had to. And now I think strength is knowing what's yours to hold and what's not." He squeezed my hand. "That's why I love you." The light changed. We crossed. Back at the apartment, I added one last note to my corkboard. They didn't give me the seat at the head of the table. I took it because I finally knew I deserved it. And for the first time, I believed every word. "What's your story of reclaiming your seat at the table? Was it with family, friends, or at work? I'd love to hear how you stepped into your power. Share it in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, subscribe, and share with someone who might need this message today."